Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. Remember, for those of you who have been around here for a while, it's currently mock draft week, so I'll be posting an additional mock draft in addition to my regularly scheduled content here on the channel. So today, with my top 24 fantasy wide receivers, we've also got a brand new mock draft coming out. We've had one on Monday and Tuesday as well, so be sure not to miss out on that. And if you're new around here, all the more reason to subscribe. We're into August now, into the home stretch of fantasy draft season, and you need to make sure you've got all the content, the advice, the information you need. So head down if you'd like some more personalized fantasy content, some more information. There's a free community Discord invite link that'll take you on over to that channel, that server, and I'll get in there talking to you, answering your questions, and helping you out with whatever you need for this fantasy season. So thank you all so much for tuning into today's video. Let's hit that intro and get right in to the top 24 wide receivers for this season. Alrighty, here we go. So again, these are my early August 2021 wide receiver rankings, my wide receiver 1s and 2s, as it is the top 24 here, whereas we've usually been doing just the top 12 throughout the earlier stages of summer. But if you want access to the entire master list of my rankings for this fantasy season, you can head over to sizzlefantasy.com, you see it on your screen, and check out the ReDraft draft guide collection for less than $10, a one-time payment, and you'll get yourself hooked up with all the fantasy information you need for this year's draft, with rankings, positional, and big board rankings, in addition to in-depth player profiles for every one of those top 250 players that I've got for fantasy leagues this summer. So there's a ton of stuff in there: sleepers, bust candidates, must-own players by round, and also some articles and videos that I'll be pumping out here in the next week and finishing that kit off, so that the only thing that I have to do after the end of this weekend is I'll just be updating that stuff and making sure that the content is not falling behind. We saw Carson Wentz get injured, so we've got some more stuff to change there. I'll probably add an exclusive article breaking down what that means for this season and all that good stuff. So stay tuned for that. Go check that out. But these are half PPR rankings. Another thing I want to touch on before we get into this first player. Why do I do half PPR? Well, all my videos, all of my content, my analysis, that whole draft guide is centered around the half PPR scoring because it's the most translatable. It's really easy to go back and forth between completely standard leagues or 1 point full PPR leagues, because you're meeting in the middle, you're halfway there on each side, so it's very easy to explain, break down, and digest those very minor tweaks and changes that might be made between analysis and input from one league to another. And that's something I've been covering here on the Discord as of late. So I actually just talked about the difference in how I would tend to evaluate a standard player versus a PPR player a little bit more. So another reason you should go check that out, and feel free to ask me any questions. But here we go. That was a lot of talking. Our intro was rather long today, and lots of information to get out there to you guys. But our wide receiver 1 for this fantasy season is Davante Adams of the Green Bay Packers. Look, the touchdown upside, it's been there for like 5 straight years now. Him and Aaron Rodgers in the red zone, it's a great connection. It's clicking almost every time down there. It's money. The target share, you've got 34% of the passes in that Packers offense in 2020 heading Davante Adams away, and he even missed a couple games. So you're talking about a player who absolutely dominates the target share on his own team, sees elite volume. He's plus 100, and I think he had like 148 targets this fantasy season, which again, missing a couple games dropped that number a little bit, but he could have very well been in the 160s. And you're talking about a player who still finished as the wide receiver 1 nonetheless. It's possible and rather likely that we might see some minor regression in the touchdown department, as he had 18 of them last season. And although that is a very consistent part of his game, that's still a pretty high marker to get to. So maybe if he's able to play the full 16 this year, the yardage department increases with that touchdown still dropping a bit. But nonetheless, I think he is still the safest option and the best player at the position here heading into this coming season. Stefon Diggs is my wide receiver 2 for the 2021 year. Him and Josh Allen in year 2 should be better. He only had 7 touchdowns, so as opposed to a Davante Adams, who I see potentially having some regression here, I think that we can see an increase in that output from Diggs this season. One of the best route runners in the league. From Matt Harmon's Reception Perception, you guys can go get some good information to that by either purchasing his package, or every once in a while on Twitter he'll put out some free tidbits. Stefon Diggs was the best player against man coverage last year and is clearly one of the best route runners in the league because of the success he's had at literally all levels of defense against all coverages. And again, you talk about having Josh Allen, a deep ball quarterback with a huge arm. That combination is very, very good, and having him on your fantasy team is fantastic when you can draft him in the second round of your leagues this year. At wide receiver 3, I'm a little bit lower on him than most. I've seen him as some people's wide receiver 1. He's my wide receiver 3, but conversely, you've also seen, I'm sure, on other rankings out there, Davante Adams being lower, Stefon Diggs being lower, or, I've even seen Stefon Diggs as a couple people's wide receiver 1s this season. So lots of variation out there in the fantasy community, but Tyreek Hill is my wide receiver 3 this season for the simple fact that Tyreek, for being such a small player, he's explosive. He's a one-touch scoring threat, but he also had 15 touchdowns. Should have been 16. He kind of got robbed with his team not throwing a challenge flag on one of them. Would have given him about another 50-yard touchdown bomb from Pat Mahomes. But nonetheless, this is a player who is not the top target on his team, and that's the main reason that I can't put him higher on this list. Travis Kelce just commands more targets in that Chiefs offense than Tyreek Hill does, and absolutely, Tyreek is more explosive. He's quicker. I mean, obviously they call him Cheetah for a reason, but there's just some things I don't love so much about seeing that. And again, as a player who had such a high touchdown count last year, and he has been finishing as a very high, very productive fantasy receiver since he's entered the league. But I think that we just have to brace ourselves for some minor regression here as a player who isn't necessarily so dominant in the red zone as he is at scoring long plays, being explosive, just running past people. There's going to be minor regression, and I'm not going to say it's going to be anything substantial. Maybe he is still able to finish as the wide receiver 1 or 2. I wouldn't put it out of the question, but I think that the target share we see from a Stefon Diggs, who led the entire league in targets last season, and then Davante Adams, who grossly outpaced everyone in terms of his own team's respective target share. Those options are a bit safer for me, and I think their upsides are all very similar. So that's the difference for me here at the top of the board. D-Hop, another player with tremendous volume and a really great floor here this season. 1,400 receiving yards in his first season with basically no preseason, no training camp, nothing to get on the same page with Kyler Murray. They were spectacular. They obviously had the Hail Murray last season and were really one of the best combinations in fantasy last year. People don't realize how good of a floor player DeAndre Hopkins is, and the ceiling is just a tick below those other guys. I think this is, again, a player who saw 160 targets last season. A very, very great fantasy situation as a player who's going in the mid-second round of 12-team leagues. At wide receiver 5, I've actually bumped Calvin Ridley down a slot, but he is still a very, very quality fantasy receiver here. Another player, a late second-round pick, but the upside is fantastic. He showed us last season he can put up bona fide wide receiver 1 numbers and absolutely fill that role on his team. So I've got no question marks surrounding Calvin heading into his first year as the number 1 option full-time for the Falcons. Kyle Pitts is coming to town, but I don't think that'll really eat into his target share too much, because we've seen one of the greatest receivers of the last decade removed from that situation. So Ridley, he's going to finish somewhere in this top 5 if he stays healthy this season. It's been a bit of an issue for him in the past, but last year he still played 15 games, which was very encouraging for me to see. DK Metcalf is down here at my wide receiver 6, another player I'm probably relatively low on. This comes down to usage and volume. He is still getting a nice amount of targets and looks, but it isn't quite as elite or as high amount as we see some of the other players at the higher ends of this list getting, even in terms of looking at a Tyreek Hill and such. So DK is probably the most physically imposing, the most elite athletic player when you combine size and speed. Probably the most dominant, potentially, has the highest ceiling of any of these guys for his long-term career perspective. But through a lens, looking at the 2021 season, you've got Tyler Lockett in town. You've got a relatively streaky quarterback. I love Russell Wilson, but last year it was all gas or all break for him. There was really no in between. The first 6 weeks, I think it was either 5 or 6 weeks, he could not be stopped. And then the rest of the stretch of the season, it was kind of a disaster at times. Interceptions increased, yardage output went down. He had a couple, it was actually more like a handful of games where I believe he was under 200 yards passing. So a lot of things, a tough division. Another thing I don't like here, and notably D-Hop is one of the best players against Jalen Ramsey in the league in terms of being able to still get his fantasy numbers. So Still a young player, only year 3 for Metcalf. He'll certainly be a high-end wide receiver 1 producer, but he's not quite as safe of an option as other guys on this list. A.J. Brown, again, a player I've kind of backed off on here a little bit. He honestly might fall down a couple spots before the end of the summer in my rankings list. I just don't, the more I think about it, the more I don't love the floor. And the floor was already not spectacular with Corey Davis in town. It looked like a full steam ahead, elite fantasy season, unstoppable A.J. Brown year when he was really the lone option left in Tennessee. But you go out and get Julio Jones, and that's going to me, make it be every other week one of these guys is going to explode and have a huge fantasy game while the other one kind of suffers a little bit because the Titans aren't a high passing volume offense, and there's only so many targets to go around this team. So Brown's going to have some stinkers this year. He's going to have some bad performances, but the highs are still going to be incredible like they were last year. He's very productive in the red zone, a big body, a fast, threat after the catch. He is very dominant, so he is still going to get those numbers. I just don't see them coming quite as consistently as we might like to see here, or we may have expected before that Jones trade. Keenan Allen here, this one is all about the floor. I think the ceiling becomes a bit better here in year 2 with Justin Herbert, but man, he has been a target monster the last 4 seasons. Hasn't dipped below 136 targets in any of the years where he's played the majority of the season. And this isn't a guy who is going to, again, dominate in the red zone, score a bunch of touchdowns, but those passes and the volume he sees in PPR leagues are going to rack you up points and rack them up very quickly. He'll be one of the most dependable lineup starts week in and week out. He has a lot of great matchups too. I mean, you talk about the Broncos increasing that defensive back room, but they've still got a lot of young names back there. The Raiders secondary was atrocious last season. And the Chiefs, they're likely going to be in shootouts with. So you look in division, and there's a lot of games I like there. The only thing that can really hold them back is some lingering issues with injuries if Herbert were to have something happen to him. But we don't project injuries here on the channel. We don't necessarily anticipate things happening, especially the worst-case scenario very often. So Keenan's a guy I feel really comfortable with rolling into the year with as my wide receiver 1 on a team if I fade that position until the mid-third round. So at number 9 here, I've got Justin Jefferson. I think the ceiling is far better for Jefferson than it is for Keenan Allen, but I think the floor isn't quite as good. He does still have Adam Thielen there, although I believe Jefferson is the clear number 1 option now, but they still want to run the ball first. This team wants to be centered around play-action passes and Dalvin Cook pounding the rock. Kirk Cousins is a good enough quarterback to get the job done for Jefferson, and Jefferson certainly did that in 2020. He had himself 1,400 yards, only 14 starts last season. He didn't start the first 2 weeks of the season. But, I mean, the sky's the limit for this kid. He looks like he's already a 4 or 5 year vet with the way he runs routes. He's extremely poised, very savvy, and just a clean and smooth route runner. So I love Jefferson this fantasy season. The value isn't quite as great as it is for some other players, but he is certainly still worth a pick here at his current draft price if you're willing to roll the dice at a moderate level this season. Allen Robinson's the next man up here for the Chicago Bears. I could not be more excited for Allen Robinson. He is my wide receiver 10 this season, and man, this kid's been waiting a long time for some respectable quarterback play. Put your hands together, Bears fans, and sing the praises of Justin Fields. He is going to unlock a dimension in a ceiling for Allen Robinson that he just hasn't been able to have, no fault of his own. But when Blake Bortles, Nick Foles, Mitchell Trubisky are your quarterbacks you're working with your whole NFL career, that's just got to be depressing for a receiver of this talent. We've seen him have 150 target season after 150 target season. He's got 3 of them in his 7 or 8 year career now. And he's had some monster performances in the yardage outputs and touchdown departments, but he just hasn't been able to put it all together. If Fields can come in here mid-season, give him that upside we're looking for, you are easily looking at a league-winning player in the back half of this season because A-Rob is one of the safest fantasy floor players year in and year out for the past 2 seasons now. Imagine what he can do when he combines that and those targets with increased quarterback play and potentially elite quarterback play that you see from rookies that are that talented down the stretch of seasons. So, A-Rob, go snatch him up. His draft price is awesome in the 3rd round of 12-team leagues. One of my favorite players to draft in fantasy this season. Terry McLaurin is my wide receiver 11. This one, he gets bumped up a slot. We'll talk about Michael Thomas later on in this list, as he does still make my top 24, but to a much lesser extent, because I think that when you're missing potentially a month of the season, you've got to be dropped down the rankings just a bit. But nonetheless, Terry McLaurin, he's always had high upside. He's been very good through his first 2 seasons in Washington. Bring in a gunslinger like Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he might just blow the roof off. The play might be a bit inconsistent, but, I mean, it's still better. I would say the fantasy floor for Terry McLaurin is better with Fitzmagic in town than it was with Kyle Allen, Dwayne Haskins, Taylor Heineke, or Alex Smith. So, I'll take my chances. I'll gamble on Terry McLaurin because, again, the ceiling is going to be ridiculously high. The report out of training camp is that Adam Humphries has been the dude for Fitzmagic, but they've got a pre-established connection. Things are going to work themselves out here. Terry is far and away the best wideout on this roster, and he will find himself open, getting the football thrown his way. You don't put it out of the picture. When Fitzmagic is your quarterback and you're as good at running deep routes as McLaurin is, it is totally in the realm of play that he might have a 200-yard game at some point this season. It's a bold statement. It's a bold prediction. But, I mean, you look at the things that guys who were into their early 30s, like Deshaun Jackson did in Tampa Bay with Fitzmagic, the things he was doing with the Dolphins last year with a relatively I would say they were a below average wide receiver core. McLaurin might be the best and youngest target that he's had to work with in years now. So, Scary Terry, he's kind of a high risk, high reward play this season, but that ceiling is punch for punch with some of the best players on this board on a week-to-week basis. But again, that floor is the reason he's not higher, because things could get a bit dicey if Fitzmagic throws himself into trouble early in games. Amari Cooper creeps into my top 12 here. Not a player I feel incredibly strong about. This could change throughout the rest of the offseason, but look, Cooper's really only in here again because Michael Thomas is moved out of my top 12. This is just a player who we've seen put up really good numbers with Dak Prescott at the helm for this team. I think that Dak coming back, hopefully that shoulder doesn't turn into anything too bothersome for him this year, but if he's out there playing the full season healthy, Cooper's going to put up good numbers, and he doesn't have the highest touchdown upside in the world, but he will have really nice yardage outputs as well as target share in that offense. He'll be getting deep balls. He'll be making explosive plays, really nice catches. The Cowboys, their defense is still bad. They're going to have to be a high-volume passing offense, and that's going to mean just more production for everyone in that receiver core. Mike Evans is just outside here as my wide receiver 2s begin here on the list. He's my number 1 player in that section of things here. For the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, look, I don't love Mike Evans in fantasy this season at all, and actually I rather dislike him. But when you're scoring touchdowns the clip he is, if he can somehow find a way to maintain that, in addition to how effective I think Tampa Bay will be in the first 3 quarters of games this year, just me kind of hinting that I expect them to be blowing teams out of the water in the 4th and just kind of running things out late. But I think he'll be a very viable player. Last season, he was kind of boom bust. He wasn't very consistent, but again, you don't really need him to be that when the upside is very high, because while touchdowns were the majority of his production last year, he can still go out there and get you 100+ yards on a game basis and be a quality producer in the yardage department as well. So again, I'm not a Mike Evans fan this year, but he is a player who does have a ceiling and definitely has reason that you could potentially be high on drafting him this year. Julio Jones is my wide receiver 14 heading into this season. Same situation as A.J. Brown, who makes it higher up on the list, and quite frankly, I just expect A.J. Brown to play more games. Julio only played 9 for the Falcons last year. It's been a few years now in a row where he's been dealing with some lingering stuff. Having that slow him down, hamper his production a little bit, that's concerning. That's legitimate stuff that we're talking about here, and not something to just sweep under the rug. The Titans also, Julio's going from a team that passed the ball at a higher clip than most teams in the league to one of the teams that passes the ball fewer than most teams in the NFL. So you're looking at a pretty extreme change of scenery for Julio Jones becoming the newest member of the Titans. The talent is still there, the veteran savvy, the experience. He'll put up numbers, he'll have some big games, but they're going to be coming a lot less consistently than they were with the Falcons, if you ask me. Chris Godwin here, the safer floor play of the two Tampa Bay wide receivers, or at least the top two Tampa Bay wide receivers. He's a middle-of-the-road wide receiver, too, for me. I think that I don't love the upside as much as I did that year he played with Jameis Winston in, what was that now, 2019. But I still think that for a player who is having a higher target share than Mike Evans is in that offense, we can still respect him. The touchdowns aren't going to be nearly as high for Godwin as they could be for Mike, but I still think that those extra passes he's getting out of the slot, the fact that he doesn't really come off the field all that often, play well to his advantage here. He's not exactly a flashy pick. I don't expect the ceiling to be that high, but I do think the floor will be very nice and something that you can rely on at points here this coming season. Jumping right into my wide receiver 16 now, Ceedee Lamb is a player who, still kind of in this early to mid stage of the wide receiver twos, I think could very easily finish as a fringe wide receiver 1, maybe even outproduce his teammate Amari Cooper this season. Lamb, who I think might score more touchdowns per se because he's playing out of the slot, has the option to break in or out on routes in that area of the field. He might get Amari in that phase, but it's also very possible that Amari has more yardage output than Ceedee Lamb does this season. I think both of these guys have an incredible ceiling. Maybe their floors dig into each other's a little bit, and we see some relatively inconsistent play, but when Dak Prescott was healthy those first 5 games, Amari Cooper was only +4 in the target department over Ceedee Lamb in his first 5 games of his career. So that's something pretty significant that has swayed me in thinking these two players are a bit more even and should be closely graded against one another when looking at their fantasy values for this coming season. So if you're looking for a league-winning player, Ceedee Lamb just might be that guy that gives you some wide receiver number 1 outputs. Michael Thomas here at the wide receiver 17 spot. Look, MT is a wide receiver 1 when he's healthy on the field, but since he had such late surgery this offseason, we know that's not going to be the case. He's not going to be playing until late September, early October, and let's cross our fingers. As much as I don't like Michael Thomas, I hate his personality. He's so loud, so annoying. Sorry, Saints fans, but he is the definition of diva receiver. I've already got 2 shares of him in leagues this year, so I've been snatching up that upside with his draft stock falling, and I'm just praying that Jameis gets that starting job so we can get that downfield play style and that upside that we haven't really seen from him yet with Drew Brees, or at least the potential of more stretched out looks. So Michael Thomas, prove me right this season. Prove me right that you're still a wide receiver 1. Last year's injuries weren't just a fluke. Come back healthy and strong. And hopefully he should have a dominant stranglehold on all the target share in this offense with no Sanders. Traquan Smith's your number 2. Kamara's going to get his work. But, there is not significant competition for targets in this offense, and it could be a very, very good fantasy situation for Michael if he is healthy once he gets back on the field this year. Tyler Lockett is my wide receiver 18 for the Seattle Seahawks this fantasy season. I am extremely high on Lockett, and a lot of people are sleeping on him much more than I think they should be. As a matter of fact, the way I have Lockett ranked is so much higher. I think I'm actually about 10 to 12 picks higher on him than his actual ADP is, so basically an entire round sooner. It seems like a gross overstatement here, but I just compared him in a mock draft recently to Jordy Nelson for the Green Bay Packers. Nobody ever thought that Jordy Nelson was the best player at the wide receiver position while he was in the league, and most people didn't think he was even an elite wide receiver option during his time in the NFL. People don't say that about Tyler Lockett either, but what made them so dang good in fantasy? The chemistry with their quarterbacks. Tyler Lockett to Russell Wilson is Aaron Rodgers to Jordy Nelson. Always on the same page, always knows where the other is on the field. The combination just makes it a deadly duo. If you can get a Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett stack this year, that's something that I think you should definitely look into doing because that gives you some very, very good upside. Lockett was injured for the greater part of last season and used as a decoy pretty much after the second half of the season. Don't overlook that. I think a lot of people don't realize that because he wasn't missing games, but he was definitely hampered out there. He was not himself, so something to keep an eye on here this season. If he stays healthy, man, I think he could really do some big things this year. Cooper Kupp is my favorite of the wide receivers in the Los Angeles Rams offense this season. Maybe comes as a surprise to most, but I think that he's going to lead the offense in target shares, obviously total targets. And I just think that playing out of the slot, being used more back to that downfield strength of his game, he is a very good route runner at all levels of the defense. But he is a very solid post route runner, post corner route runner. He can stretch the field, run vertical. We didn't see that so much when Jared Goff was losing his confidence, not playing up to his standards. Well, I mean, Jared Goff's standards have always been relatively low, and Sean McVay has kind of bashed on him this offseason after getting him out of the building. But, man, I think Matt Stafford will increase the production holistically for this whole offense, and I think that Cooper Kupp could very well be locked in as his top target once the season gets underway. Kenny Golladay, a really risky pick here, but a player I think has fantastic upside and can still be ranked in my top 24 receivers lists. He could be a top 12 wideout. There's nothing saying he can't do that. He has done it before with Matt Stafford, obviously back on the Lions. But Danny Dimes is the quarterback now in New York. I've got major question marks about that. Reportedly, he's already gotten a little bit dinged up at Giants training camp, which is less than desirable to hear. It shouldn't be anything significant based off of what I've heard at this moment in time when I'm recording this video, but you never know. News could come out. He walked off the field during 7-on-7s with a trainer. So something's a little bit off there, but the size, the ability to produce in the red zone, the awareness he has on the field, it's all great. He can score a heck of a lot of touchdowns for that offense and be the number one option there. So we've at least got to talk about him here. And then Robert Woods, one of the safest floor plays in fantasy. I think I'm actually sleeping on him a bit much this season. He could very well finish higher than he is on my list right now. And I acknowledge he could totally overtake Cooper Kupp this year, who I've got ranked higher. But I've just got a feeling about Kupp this season. I think the targets will be very, very strong for him and very steady this year, in addition to seeing, again, those downfield and touchdown numbers increase from where they've been at the past 2 seasons since he tore that ACL. So Woods will be used dynamically, though. I think he'll be going back to used more in that jet sweep game, that wide receiver run game for Sean McVay's offense. He'll be used as a very productive line of scrimmage player. We see them get him out in space as a wide receiver screen player on a lot of times, and he'll just be there. He's not going to go out there and win you your week by yourself, but he's a plug-and-play, a set it and forget it type lineup option. Robert Woods is as safe as it gets. Last year we talked about him in that category with Allen Robinson, and I think that we could potentially see him, although he is aging, he's still, late 20s, early 30s. He's still very much in the scope of things, a relevant fantasy option this season. Brandon Ayuk, another guy I think could finish a lot higher than I have him ranked right now. I had to kind of discount my ranking status for him a tad because he did produce absolutely awesome numbers down the stretch of last season, and he was playing with his hair on fire, but he never had really any games where he was putting up elite numbers with a 100% healthy George Kittle or a 100% Deebo Samuel at the same time. So walking into week 1, that's most likely the situation here. He's going to have a little bit more competition to command those targets, those looks, those opportunities from Kyle Shanahan's offense. So reportedly, he has been the favorite target for all 4 quarterbacks in the 49ers roster right now. Obviously, we're probably only going to see Jimmy G and Trey Lance this season, hopefully. But it speaks to who he is as a player, the dependability that the quarterbacks have in him, the assurance he gives them when throwing the football his way. And again, he's kind of like a younger and better Robert Woods. You can use him in the wide receiver screen game. You can use him as a jet sweep player, a rushing threat, get him out in space. He's very good in the open field, leaped over a defender for a touchdown last season. There's a lot of things you can do with him, and I think he's a better downfield route runner than Deebo Samuel is. So a lot of things to like about Ayuk here. I'm just hoping that in a relatively run-first offense, they have that running back committee. They love to deploy those backs out there. I'm hoping he can get the usage that we need to see from him to put up the numbers that he obviously has the potential and capability of doing so. DJ Moore is the next man up on the list here, getting close to the end. My wide receiver 23. You're going to see DJ Moore featured in Thursday's video, and unfortunately, as a Dynasty owner, not something I love to see too much, but I think that Robbie Anderson is actually the safer option in this Carolina offense. Sam Darnold, as much as we all think he could get better, well, there's going to be a lot of people out there who probably think Sam Darnold still stinks. I've got hope. I have optimism that things will improve from his time with the Jets. But the fact that he's going back to a team now, albeit he has better weapons all over the field, better offensive line, better play calling, head coaching, his number 2 target, I think a lot of people would say that DJ Moore is the most talented wideout on this roster. Robbie Anderson is still the guy he's already got a connection with. He already has chemistry with him, played in New York with Anderson. It is not going to shock me whatsoever if for the second straight year in a row, Robbie Anderson out-targets DJ Moore. DJ Moore finished and barely kind of scooted ahead of Robbie in overall fantasy output by the end of last season, but the target numbers were rather lopsided. I think it was like 138 targets for Anderson to maybe 120 for DJ Moore, something around that relative range. DJ Moore is one of the best wideouts in the league. If you look at his contested catch numbers for a player who's not even that tall, and his explosive ability to make plays after the catch, he's a fantastic athlete, a fantastic player entering into year 4 of his contract with the team. I've just got my worries. I think there's a little bit of shakiness going on here. And again, with not knowing what Darnold's going to give us, I think there's relatively respectable reason to be a bit timid with him on draft day this season. And then Adam Thielen, the last guy in my wide receiver 2 list this year. Look, he's not the number 1 in Minnesota. That's Justin Jefferson. There was never really, it was always kind of cloudy. Was it Diggs or Thielen prior to this fantasy season? Which one was the true number 1 option? There's no questions anymore. It is 100% Justin Jefferson. When you tell me that a rookie came out and had 1,400 yards receiving in 14 games, had all the targets that he did, and he looked so experienced in the way he did things, and I talked about that earlier in the video. Jefferson was truly phenomenal last season and incredibly impressive to watch. Thielen was just a touchdown guy. 14 TDs in 15 games is unsustainable production. I don't care who you are. I would even be cautious and I would be hesitant to tell you, as a Packer fan and a guy who has Davante Adams as my wide receiver number 1, that he could do that. His touchdowns are coming down from last year. Touchdown production at the wide receiver position is one of the most dicey things to try and project year over year. If you've got a high touchdown count, you might as well expect it to drop. If it's low, you can optimistically and realistically say it's going to increase. But, I mean, unless someone else is getting removed from the equation, there's no guarantees that that is actually going to be the case. So, Thielen at 14, when you talk about Jefferson only having 7, it could just swing in the other favor this season. And for a guy who didn't crack 1,000 yards receiving, only had 925, was less productive after the catch than Justin Jefferson was, you're looking at regression here. And as a guy, again, 15 games, finished as wide receiver 9 overall in half PPR scoring. Things aren't going to be quite as pretty for Adam this year, and I think we should all be prepared to see that this year. All right, those are my top 24 wide receivers for the 2021 fantasy season as of early August here. So keep that in mind. If you're watching this towards the end of the month here, these lists, these rankings might have changed. They probably will have changed because I'll be updating them weekly. But this, in terms of putting these videos out, I might only release rankings once or twice more throughout the summer, as this is a staple part of that draft guide collection, which, one more time, you can find that down in the description of today or any video. Again, check out that Discord. We want you in there. Let's make this the most interactive fantasy channel on YouTube, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.